morning, everyone, and welcome to the online service of Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, a loving, spirited, and inclusive congregation. While our physical sanctuary can be found in Port Townsend, Washington, the sanctuary of our values and principles are found in the hearts and minds of the curious and creative people located throughout the region, the country, and the world. We are so glad that you are all with us today. Let's take a few deep breaths to settle our minds and enter this hour with our hearts wide open. It is good to be together. In a moment, lighting the chalice, you might want to get a candle and matches and light your own chalice to mark our time together. We will now hear our prelude by Pat Rogers on piano. Our chalice lighting words were written by Reverend Maureen Killeran. For every time we make a mistake and we decide to start again, we light this chalice. For every time we are lonely and we let someone be our friend, we light this chalice. For every time we are disappointed and we choose to hope, we light this chalice. Our opening words are from Donna Markova. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which comes to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which comes to me as blossom goes on as fruit. Our opening song is Spirit of Life and features the QUF Quartet. The video was produced by one of them, our own Doug Rogers. It will be followed by a story by our Director of Family Ministries, Beau Ohlgren.
Spirit of me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're talking about individuality and being yourself. So today, Shaggington and I wanted to share this story about Muehlethaler, who encounters that challenge of figuring out how to best be oneself. This is called From the Stars in the Sky to the Fish in the Sea. Once upon a time, in a little blue house on a hill on the edge of town, a baby was born. And they were born when both the sun and the moon were in the sky, so the baby couldn't decide what to be. Boy or girl, bird or fish, cat or rabbit, tree or star. The baby couldn't decide. So the baby looked a little like everything. They looked very strange. All the same, the baby's mother gave her child a bath and rocked them in her arms. Your name, she said, is Muehlethaler, and she sang a song that her own mother had sung to her long ago. Whatever you dream of, I believe you can be, from the stars in the sky to the fish in the sea. You can crawl like a crab, or with feathers fly high, and you know that I'll love you with an endless supply. And even though they still couldn't decide, the baby felt loved. Muehlethaler grew up to be a strange, magical child who was always changing. They grew feathers and wings to fly with bluebirds in the mornings, scales and a tail to swim with fish in the afternoons, and fur and paws to play with puppies in the evenings. And still, no matter how they changed, their mother loved them and they felt safe. One day, it was time for the child to go to school, and they were so excited. They grew a tail of peacock feathers and a coat of tiger stripes. Have fun, said Muehlethaler's mother. But when they got to school, the other students were either boys or girls, and they had no feathers, no scales, no leaves, no fur, no fins, not even any sparkles. No one invited Muehlethaler to play, and one boy even tugged out a tail feather. The next day, they wore a turtle shell and porcupine spines, and no one pulled or poked at them, but the other children still pointed and whispered. The day after, Muehlethaler wore no feathers, no scales, no leaves, no fur, no fins, no shells, no spines, not even any sparkles. Muehlethaler was invited to play baseball with the boys, and no one pointed, whispered, laughed, or stared. However, when Muehlethaler joined the little girls playing hopscotch, "Boys don't play hopscotch," said the little girl. "Are you a boy or a girl anyway?" asked the little boy. "Didn't you have a shell the other day?" asked the little girl. "And feathers the day before?" "What are you supposed to be?" said several children at once. "I don't know," shouted Muehlethaler, and galloped out of the playground on horse's hooves, swam through the stream with a fish's tail, and soared up the hill on an eagle's wings. Muehlethaler went to their mother. "I wore feathers and stripes so that the other kids would think I was beautiful, but they thought I was weird. And so then I wore a shell and spine so that no one would pull or poke me, but they still wouldn't talk to me. And then I tried to be just like everyone else, but I haven't made any friends. I can't decide what to be. Why do I have to be just one thing?" "It isn't always easy to be different from everyone else," said their mother. "But you can only be who you are." "What if the other children don't like who I am?" sniffled Muehlethaler. Their mother smiled, sadly. "I don't know," she said. but I do know this. Whatever you dream of, I believe you can be. From the stars in the sky to the fish in the sea. Muehlethaler felt loved that night, and they slept a deep sleep. The next day, Muehlethaler wore fur, feathers, scales, leaves, and many sparkles that glittered like stars. For a moment, none of the other children spoke to them, and then a little girl said, "You can fly? That's so cool." "I like your sparkles," said a little boy. "I'm sorry I pulled your feathers," said the boy with red hair. "I was a little envious of them." Muehlethaler asked, "Does anyone want to play with me?" And they showed the other children how to gallop like horses and climb like monkeys and swim like fish. It was fun to be many different things. And the child of fur, feathers, scales, leaves, and sparkles, who was neither boy nor girl, but many things and always changing, felt happy. And in the little blue house on the hill on the edge of town, Muehlethaler's mother smiled and sang the song her mother had sung to her once upon a time. Whatever you dream of, I believe you can be. From the stars in the sky to the fish in the sea. You can crawl like a crab or with feathers fly high. And you'll know that I love you with an endless supply. You never have to be just one thing. And it is not always easy to know who you are, and sometimes even harder to be true to ourselves. But know that you bring something unique and special into the world, and I'm glad you are you.
Thank you, Beau and Shaggington. I always love that part of the service. What we would like to do now is acknowledge and welcome those of you who are visiting us this morning. If you are watching this on our Facebook page or on YouTube, you are invited to say hello in the comments section and tell us your name and where you are from. If you're having a hard time seeing the comments section, simply take your computer, tablet, or phone out of full screen mode, and you should see the comments section on the right-hand side of your screen. We would love to hear from you. We hope you will join us for our virtual coffee hour in our Fellowship Hall Zoom room. If you do not have that link, it will be posted in the comments section at this time. And if you find this service useful or inspirational, or hopefully both, please share the link with your friends and family. We welcome you all. So, everybody, we welcome you. We are so glad you're here with us today. It is now time for the offering. Today, our collection will go toward the building, program, and staffing costs of QUUF. If you would like to donate today, you can do it in 3 ways. You could text the amount you would like to give to the number that should now be showing at the bottom of the screen. Or you can go to our website, QUUF.org, and click on the giving link. Or finally, simply mail a check to QUUF. Just remember to put the offering comment in the memo line for building, staff, etc. We will now gratefully receive your offering as Pat Rogers plays for us. Thank you, Pat. That was nice. We will now share our joys and sorrows, recognizing that our personal joys and sorrows are only a fragment of the joys and sorrows of the larger community of life. Thus, we will place this first stone thinking in particular of immigrants all around the world who have contracted COVID-19 because of their cramped working and sleeping conditions. These fellow humans are sick, lack adequate medical care, and are financially destitute. Many also lack the option of going home because of closed national borders. So, today, we will place a stone of sorrow in recognition of their suffering and in honor of their inherent worth and dignity. Now, within the congregation, we have 2 candles to light today. We light the first candle for Gail Cowney, who spent her 75th birthday at the drive-thru getting tested for COVID-19. She tested, unfortunately, positive. Her husband, Bill, who had the same flu-like symptoms as Gail has the prior week, he tested negative, but it's quite possible that he had it, but had beat it by the time of the test. Gail, who is medically vulnerable, says that so far so good, and we're glad to hear that. She reported having medium symptoms of stomach flu, but as of Tuesday, no respiratory issues. Gail also says that she and Bill feel loved and cared for, and asks that you refrain from calling or texting them right now. I'm sure she needs her rest. Emails are okay. What they really want from you, though, is to send positive thoughts her way and Bill's, and please wear your mask. We hope that you have a speedy recovery, Gail. The second candle we light today is for the double birthday of Gunther and Lee Doshi. Gunther, who turned 90, and his wife Lee, who turned 87, were surrounded in safe, distant love by our pastoral care team. Here's a photo of the love rally our pastoral care team did at Gunther and Lee's home. Happy birthday, you two. And now we place a final stone, holding in our hearts the joys and sorrows I have just shared, but also thinking of the joys and sorrows among us that are unexpressed, but of no less importance. Thank you, Carrie. I invite you now into a moment of silence, which will be followed by a musical response. Thank you.
Our reading today is the poem Now I Become Myself by May Sarton. Now I become myself. It's taken time, many years and places. I have been dissolved and shaken, worn other people's faces, run madly as if time were there, terribly old, crying a warning. Hurry, you will be dead before, what? Before you reach the morning? Or the end of the poem is clear? Or love safe in the walled city? Now to stand still, to be here, feel my own weight and density. The black shadow on the paper is my hand. The shadow of a word, as thought shapes the shaper, falls heavy on the page, is heard. All fuses now falls into place, from wish to action, word to silence. My work, my love, my time, my face, gathered into one intense gesture of growing like a plant. As slowly as the ripening fruit, fertile, detached, and always spent, falls but does not exhaust the root, so all the poem is, can give, grows in me to become the song, made so and rooted by love. Now there is time, and time is young. Oh, in this single hour I live, all of myself and do not move. I, the pursued, who madly ran, stand still, and stop the sun.
A strict canon has been defined as where a melody starts again a measure later. This is rather a relaxed, if not loose, canon.
'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right.
I'm very pleased to get to introduce our guest speaker today, Carrie Andrews. Carrie moved to Port Townsend in 1995 and became a member of QUF in 1997. Carrie's daughter, Perry, was the first child dedicated in what was then the new sanctuary and is now the Fellowship Hall. Perry grew up with my kids in QUF. Carrie has had a varied career, producing public information for the Department of Ecology, owning a web development company for 15 years, being the assistant head of school at Swan School, and being the communications director at the Northwest Maritime Center. In the past few years, she has found her calling and started Peace of Mind, a patient advocacy and advanced care planning practice. I'm sure she is very successful. Please join me in welcoming Carrie Andrews.
I feel incredibly lucky to be at a point in my life where I feel like I'm finally exactly who I'm supposed to be. That has not always been the case. A lot of people say it took them a long time to figure out who they are. In my case, that was true literally as well as figuratively. I grew up knowing I was adopted, but I had been adopted during a time when adoptions were closed, and the only information passed to adoptive families was vague and non-identifying. Growing up, I remember feeling often like the parts of me that weren't just like my family must be just like some other family. I spent a lot of early years assuming that somewhere out there were people exactly like me. Looking back, I think uncertainty about who I really am started at a pretty young age. I just figured everyone else knew who they were. My parents divorced when I was 7, and we moved a lot when I was a kid. In 12 years of school, I lived in the Bay Area and in Los Angeles, in rural western Massachusetts, in a suburb of Boston, in Minneapolis, and in South Florida, as well as a year and a half traveling through England, France, and Spain on a 36-foot sailboat when I was in 7th grade. I have fond memories of different aspects of all of those adventures, but I did not have a strong sense of who I was in relation to being from somewhere. I don't recall what criteria I used to choose the colleges I applied to. I had no idea what I wanted to do. There was never any question I would attend college. Not going was not an option. I was accepted to Lewis and Clark College in the Northwest, but in a last-minute decision, and one of the few decisions I regret in my life, I opted to stay in Minneapolis and attend the University of Minnesota. I never connected with anyone in college. Everyone seemed so motivated and sure of their path. The one semester I lived on campus, my roommate was a pre-med student, so I mostly hung out with people I'd known in high school who hadn't moved on. I left school after 2 years. When I was 20, I met a guy unlike anyone I'd dated before. He had long hair and attended Grateful Dead concerts, was 6 years older than I was, and had been a ski bum in Colorado. I moved in with him within a month. One day, 6 months later, I came across an Evergreen State College brochure, and in an uncharacteristically spontaneous moment said, "We should move to Washington." In May of 1988, we drove west. I went to Evergreen and finished my degree. Since I still didn't know what I was really interested in or what I wanted to do, I adopted the interests of those around me, trying to be the person other people wanted to be with. I especially wanted to be adventurous enough, outdoorsy enough, carefree enough to get my partner to abandon his dreams of traveling untethered and settle down. You know, the realistic expectation that you can completely change someone. We got married when I was 23. Strangely, that didn't solve everything. I decided I needed to find my birth mother in order to truly understand myself and figure out who I was. It took about a year, but in late summer of 1993, I talked with my birth mother for the first time. We talked for almost 2 hours about all sorts of things. As we said goodbye after that first conversation, she thanked me and said, "This is the first time in 26 years I have known peace." That night, as I was finally falling asleep, I saw a vivid image of an unfinished chalk outline of a person on dark pavement, with the outline slowly being completed until the image was whole. When we met in person, I was introduced to about 30 relatives that first weekend. It was my first experience seeing people who really, truly looked like me. It was a positive experience. I'm still in touch with Judy, in regular communication with an aunt and an uncle, and I'm close to all my cousins. However, I learned one really startling thing. The parts of me that were not just like my adoptive family were also not just like my birth family. At age 27, which I realize is a lot later than most people figure this out, I finally realized that there were parts of me that are just me, that weren't directly traceable to nature or nurture. It was not a completely comforting realization, because I still wasn't sure who I was or what I wanted to do with my life. At this point, I entered what I call the busy time. Over the next 10 years, I started a web development company. We moved to Port Townsend and had a baby. I joined AAUW, served on the Economic Development Council board, became active on QUF committees, and did a stint as board president, sang with Rain Shadow Chorale and served as treasurer for that group, was on the Swan School board, helped in the classroom and drove for field trips, and managed a business with 3 to 5 employees and over 100 clients. I don't remember coming up for air much then. I do remember one night as I was leaving for some board meeting, 2-year-old Perry, who was being given a bath by her dad, jumped out of the tub and came running to the door, stark naked and dripping wet, crying, "Why do you always have to leave?" And one night in the middle of dinner, 4-year-old Perry hopped down from her chair and headed up the stairs to our office. I said, "Excuse me, where are you going?" And she said, "I'm sorry, I have a meeting," as she closed the door behind her. Oops. So I was going as fast as I could. Felt like I was failing on multiple fronts and still didn't feel drawn to anything in particular. I recall my 35th birthday being really hard. I felt like at that point I should definitely have a direction, a career, some higher aspiration. Around then I came across a Howard Thurman quote that deeply resonated with me. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. I realized that I was not really alive. It helped me think about my busyness differently. Maybe I needed to figure out what was really important to me, not just who I was in relation to what I did for other people. That was also about the time I began to run. I had a new friend from QUF who asked if I'd ever want to run sometime. When we first started, I could barely go a mile and definitely always walked up anything resembling a hill, which is everything in Port Townsend. She was patient, and we had a good time talking, so we kept at it. Eventually, I was running 3 miles regularly, and one day I suggested we set our sights on something bigger, like a half marathon. Over the next 10 years, we ran a dozen half marathons, 2 marathons, and 4 or 5 triathlons. We exercised at least 5 days a week together and traveled to events from Arizona to Hawaii. It was the first time in my life I'd ever been athletic. It was something I did purely for myself and not because it had value to anyone else. I felt truly happy with myself, at least in this one area, for possibly the first time. I told myself I had a pretty great life. I had a terrific kid who was thriving in middle school. I had left the web business for a job at Swan School that I enjoyed. I had good friends, and I had the pleasure of having my parents living right down the street. I was growing into a sense of who I was and what I wanted, but I started to want more. And then everything began to change. In 2009, my dad, who was back in Minnesota again, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and given 2 weeks to live. Although I'd had a challenging relationship with him my whole life, he was alone in the Twin Cities, and it fell to my brother, living in the D.C. area, and me to manage his care. Once we found a care facility for him, he rallied and hung on for 5 more months, so my brother and I began flying back to Minneapolis once a month. We would get some work done, meet with his doctors, take care of his banking, get his Medicare benefits transferred to hospice, clean out his apartment, etc. And then we'd take Dad for a drive. We'd talk about his early life and our lives together. He liked going past places he'd lived, the lake he'd ice skated on, his elementary school. He was deeply in denial about dying, so we couldn't directly address that. But we danced all the way around it and somehow managed to find peace. On what would prove to be our last visit, one of the last things he said was that adopting us was the best thing he had done in his life and that he was proud of us. It was profoundly healing, and I will always be grateful for that time with him. After Dad died, I realized how fulfilling the experience of walking with him through his last months had been for me. I had seen firsthand the benefits of having proper paperwork in place and how much easier that made it for us to help him. I experienced the power of advocating for someone who was otherwise at the mercy of care facility staff. I saw the transformation that took place for my brother and me in being able to look death squarely in the face and be able to talk about it. I saw the peace it brought Dad at the end to be able to say things out loud he had never said before. I felt drawn to the whole experience. Also at that time, after 25 years of being good friends, business partners, and co-parents, my husband and I decided to go our separate ways. It turned out my campaign to change him had not been successful, surprise, and we had been living almost entirely separate lives for the past 10 years. It was not an easy time, but we both knew it was the right thing to do. It was more like setting each other free. I started to try new things, and for the first time, to explore what I liked. I took a job share with a friend as co-director of the Wooden Boat Festival. I learned to ride a motorcycle and took up swing dancing. I made new friends, went hiking, enjoyed going out to hear live music, and took a camping road trip through Utah with just my dog. I found real love with a person who didn't have one single thing about him that I wanted to change, and with whom I have genuine shared interests. We married a year later. And I continued to be drawn to death, to finding meaningful work in some aspect of it. I continued to work with friends and family members to get their paperwork in order. I helped my new in-laws talk through their end-of-life wishes after a terminal diagnosis, and sat with Ross's father as he died. I took my mother-in-law to doctor's appointments and navigated her care and release after an illness landed her in Life Care Center. One day, a friend connected me with an organization that her friend had founded in Seattle, the Washington State Health Advocacy Association, and finally everything started to fall into place. In meeting dozens of other people who were serving as patient advocates and helping people identify their end-of-life wishes, I finally figured out what I was being called to do. Over the last 3 years, I have been teaching classes in advanced care planning. I sat and studied for a national exam to become a board-certified patient advocate last fall. I have a couple of advocacy clients and have worked with dozens of people, both individually and in classes, to help them identify what is important to them and how they want to live the rest of their lives. I host a monthly Death Over Drinks conversation where we discuss all different aspects of death and dying in an informal setting, lately by Zoom. I love working with people to help them overcome their fears around death and to have frank conversations about dying. To me, being able to talk about death frees us up to live more fully and ultimately to die better. I don't feel like what I do is work. It feels like an honor. I came across an anonymous quote on a chalkboard outside a coffee shop once. Someone once told me the definition of hell: the last day you have on earth, the person you became will meet the person you could have become. That struck me enough to write it down and put it on my bulletin board, and frankly kept me up at night for many years. I feel so much better about this now. I think the who I became and the who I could have become are darn close to the same person at this point. Working so closely with death has helped me savor every day. I do not take my days for granted, nor the great fortune I have to have found passion in my life and my work, and with time left to savor it. As May Sarton concluded in Now I Become Myself, now there is time, and time is young. Oh, in this single hour I live, all of myself and do not move. I, the pursued who madly ran, stand still, and stop the sun. Thank you.
Please join us as we sing our closing hymn, Rising Green. My blood does rise in the roots of yon oak. A sap doth run in my veins. Boundless my soul like the open sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars, where the stars, where the stars forever have lain. My hands hold the weavings of time without end, my sight as deep as the sea. Beating my heart sounds the measures of old, that of love's eternity. That of love, that of love, that of love's eternity. I feel the tides as they answer the moon, rushing on a far distant sand. Winging my song is the wind of my breast, and my love blows over the land. And my love, and my love, and my love blows over the land. My foot carries days of old into new. Our dreaming shows us the way. Wondrous our faith settles deep in the earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day.
Before we extinguish our flame, I want to remind you that our guest speaker next week is Reverend Florence Kaplow, the former assistant minister here at QUF. Florence will be speaking on the power of compassion, and we hope you can join us. Let us now extinguish our flame. We extinguish our flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. After the service, I hope you will consider joining us for our virtual coffee hour. What you can expect is to be placed in the Zoom room with one of our coffee hour hosts, who will facilitate personal check-ins as well as reflection questions on the sermon topic. I hope to see you there. But first, let us turn our attention to Pat Rogers, who will now play our postlude, Magnetic Rag by Scott Joplin. Take it away, Pat.